Hey guys, it's Saria. Welcome back to my channel. So in case you couldn't guess it from my outfit, from my just so accurate gender bend cosplay, I am dressed up as Milo from Atlantis, because this is the 4th installation of the Forgotten Favorites. So if you guys have been with my channel, you have been seeing that every month we honor a forgotten favorite, meaning we choose a very underrated Disney movie and we honor it in some way, meaning we make a video dedicated to that movie. And it can be anything. The sky's the limit. As long as it has to do with that movie, then you've met the goal. In my personal opinion, I think Atlantis is actually like one of the most underrated Disney movies of all time. I'm going to take these off in case there's a glare. These just occurred to me. This month we're doing Atlantis. I personally am absolutely obsessed with the movie Atlantis, and I really want to do like a fun facts about this movie, but I also really wanted to make what I'm holding in my hand, which is the Shepherd's Journal. I am so happy with how this came out. I really do love it. I think that it came out beautiful and I am so happy to own this. And best part is pretty much everything on here you can do with Dollar Tree products. Be sure to go check out everybody else's videos after you're done watching this one, and maybe even stay tuned for some random Atlantis facts that I decide to sprinkle into this tutorial.
So starting off, I got this book from Dollar Tree and they have a bunch of them. I just chose one that in the size and kind of like width and depth that I wanted. I am removing the slip cover, and then I also picked up these 2-inch hinges. Originally I only bought 1 pack, but you will actually need 3 of them. And then I also have this high intensity magnet, which I will link below. I get them off Amazon, but I used 2 magnets instead of 1. I also used a wooden dowel rod, 2 wooden beads, and some craft foam. Again, most of these supplies can be found at Dollar Tree with the exception of the large craft foam. I've only been able to find that at Walmart or craft stores. You're going to cut it down to fit the size of the book, but you will need the larger one. So first I lay down my large piece of craft foam. I would suggest looking for the color that you actually want your craft foam to be. I just used what I had on hand, and white seemed like the easiest one to paint. This is going to be essentially another cover for the book. Now you're going to want to cut it larger than the actual size of your book. If you can see here, I'm leaving myself at least 1 inch on all sides because I'm going to be gluing this around the edge of the book. The reason I decided not to paint the book as is because I wanted to give it a little bit more of a thickness to it. The Shepherd's Journal in the movie has, I don't know how to explain it other than saying it just looks like it has a very thick covering on it, so I wanted to do this to kind of build up the covering on the book, if that makes sense. Now, if you are looking to make this a little bit faster, you could totally cut this step out and just paint the outside of your book. Now, how I'm going to be attaching this is, if you can see, I folded the edge of this piece of craft foam around the cover of the book to create kind of a crease, and that just made it easier to glue down when the time came. So I'm just using my hot glue gun to attach this, and it worked really well. This craft foam will be very permanent on there once you hot glue it down. So I just lay down a line of it and then fold it over. And then if you guys did see, I used my scissors just to snip the craft foam on the binding area because it made it easier to fold over, and then I'll show you how I did the binding in a little bit. I am using those little silicone finger protectors from Dollar Tree while using this hot glue because I don't want to burn my fingers. I highly suggest them. They come in a pack of 3. This video is not sponsored. Wouldn't that be the jam if it was, though? And then I am, to do the corners, these are a little bit trickier. I just kind of did what I thought would work, and it pretty much worked. But I snipped off kind of the excess of my corner, and then I'm just folding it over. And then if you guys can see, I gave it almost like a trapezoidal shape. So I cut from the top down toward the corner, and that made it fold a little bit nicer. And then I lay down another line of hot glue and just fold over that last edge. You could also do this project with fabric. I thought that that would be really cool if you went to like Joann's or Hobby Lobby and picked out one that kind of looked like leather. That would save you a lot of steps of the texture painting that we're going to be doing later. I just went with what I had in my craft room to save money. But if you're wanting to do this another way, I would totally suggest going and picking up like a faux leather or something like that. And then I'm just going to repeat these steps on the other side. I'm actually not going to speed this up though because I want you guys to be able to see what I'm doing. Next, we're going to move on to the binding. So if you guys can see, I have a little bit of craft foam like sticking out from the center bindings because I snipped it in order to cover the sides. I am cutting off most of the excess and just leaving myself a little bit, just enough to hot glue and fold down in order to cover up the blue cover on the original book. Also, something I want to point out to you guys, my book has a very bright blue inside, so like when the cover opens up, I can see blue on the inside. That doesn't bother me at all, especially since blue is like a color of Atlantis. But if that's going to bug you guys, I would definitely check the inside of your book. You guys can see it really well here, that navy blue color. So if you're just going to want black or white or something, just open up the books and check to see which one has the inside that you like. Now, my craft foam did start to pull my book open. Once we are all done, you're going to see how that's not going to be a problem. So if your book is kind of snapping itself open, that's okay. Just make sure you don't pull that craft foam on the original cover too tight because you don't want your book not to be able to close. So maybe before you hot glue the back, just kind of fold it and close the book and make sure you've got enough space. A lot of making this book was trial and error, so I cut out a bunch of stuff that didn't work, and I'm just going to show you guys what did. So I'm going to make the surrounding border on the book first. So what I'm doing is marking a 1/2 inch from each side on this other piece of craft foam. Now I've already measured out this foam. It is larger than my book, and it actually has a lot of extra space on it because the middle of the shepherd's journal pokes out from the book, and you guys are going to see when I attach it. So make sure you guys watch this all the way through one time before starting the tutorial, just so that all the steps make sense. And then I just use my meter stick to draw straight lines, and then I'm going to cut the center of this piece of craft foam out, and that is going to be the perimeter of the book. I did invest in this little tabletop cutting board, and it is amazing. It is so much easier than getting out my ginormous one that I use for sewing, and it was only a few dollars at Hobby Lobby. I got it on sale, and it's great for using an X-Acto knife. It's also great for cutting out ears because the ear fabric is so small. It's like you don't have to get out the big giant one. But I believe this was only $5, so I would highly suggest getting one if you are a crafter. So I went ahead and removed the center, and I did check this on my book. It is just large enough to do what I'm wanting this extra piece to do. I'm going to show you guys a closer up view of what I'm talking about a little bit later on in the tutorial. But next we're going to move on to painting the cover of our book so that it has time to dry while we're working on the other steps. I'm going to be using my Waverly chalk paint in the shade Truffle, which is a dark chocolate brown. I prefer chalk paint for so many reasons. One of the biggest reasons for this particular project is drying time. Chalk paint only takes about 30 minutes to dry, whereas acrylic paint can take an hour, maybe more. Also, it is a thicker paint. I only had to do 1 coat of this brown paint, whereas acrylic paint probably would have needed a couple of coats. I am going to speed through this just because this is very straightforward. Just use a brush and go up and down in the same direction. Also make sure you get the inside of your book. That's something I tend to forget, and I get the edges really good, but then I forget I have to open the book and paint the inside. So once your top coat is done, then lay the book on that top, open it up, and paint the inside of your book, just so that when the book is visible, you can't see that it's a different color on the inside. And then I'm also going to paint my little framing piece. I'm going to be using Waverly chalk paint in the shade Elephant, which is a very dark gray. Now I'm going to warn you guys, before we get to all the detail painting, this book is very bland looking, detail painting makes a world of a difference. I am a theater teacher and I've learned a lot through scenic painting, and that's kind of where I've gotten a lot of these techniques, but you guys are going to see the humongous difference it makes when you add some paint. Also, a tricky part with this is that because this is like bright green, I do have to paint the top, wait for it to dry, then paint the sides, wait for it to dry, and then paint the back. Just allow for drying time when you're working on this project. Next, we're going to move on to the little symbol that is in the center of the shepherd's journal. So I did pull up a reference photo on my phone. I would absolutely suggest doing that. I would never do something like this from memory because I do not trust my memory. And on the insert piece of that craft foam, make sure you save it because we're going to be using it for a lot of other portions of this book. So I'm just kind of sketching it out with a pencil, and then I'm going to cut this out using my X-Acto knife. As far as measurement goes, I would just measure your book and then I eyeballed mine if I'm being honest, guys, but just use your book as a reference point because obviously everybody's going to be using probably a different book. And once you have that piece all cut out, make sure not to lose your little dot. This was definitely the trickiest part to cut out because it's so small, which I thought about it later, and you could just use like matching puffy paint to do that little dot in the center, which might be easier if you have some on hand. But I didn't think about that until now. So I'm going to be using two colors for this. One is a peach tone. That's just to give a top coat in order to cover up all of this green. And then after I do that, I originally planned on using gold acrylic paint as a top layer, but I just ended up spray painting this gold because there's another few pieces that have to get spray painted gold, and I just did it all at once to make it easier. I still would suggest maybe laying down. I don't really know how necessary it is to do this step if you're gonna spray paint. I just already did, so just be prepared to maybe have to do 2 coats of the spray paint if that's the way you choose to do this. Okay, this next step is a little bit odd. So using the other half of that, the rest of that craft foam, I am painting it all that elephant gray color. The reason I'm doing this is because we have to make a design similar to the border that we created using this elephant gray color. And it's just easiest to paint this whole chunk, and then we're gonna cut it into strips later on once it's dry. Moving on to the piece that is attached to the spine of the book, I'm going to be using a dowel rod and these little wooden beads along with some hot glue. Now the dowel rod is too large, so I measured it to the size that I wanted it on the spine of my book, and then I marked it using scissors. I did have to pull out some pretty heavy duty pliers that cut in order to cut this dowel rod because it was quite thick. I did try to like saw it with my X-Acto knife. Don't do that. I ruined my X-Acto knife. And then the little wooden beads, they have that hole on top. So not only do I want to cover up that hole, but I also want to give it the same look as the one in the movie. So I created like a little swirl on the top of the wooden bead using my hot glue gun. You guys can actually see the pliers that I use. They're vice grip pliers. I don't think they're for this, but I use them to cut wire, and they did work to cut this dowel rod. Next, I'm using a sanding sponge from Dollar Tree just to smooth out that edge that I cut and kind of round it off a little bit. I also rounded the other side of the dowel rod just so that they matched and had a rounded edge. On this next step, I'm using hot glue to attach the wooden beads. However, one of mine did break off, so I would actually suggest using a combination of super glue or E6000 and hot glue. I do this all the time on my channel because it provides an immediate bond as well as a long-term bond so that things don't break. So again, if you have some sort of super glue, I would do a dot of super glue and a little bit of hot glue to give you both immediate and long-term hold. Once that is all done and dry, you're gonna have this be spray painted gold as well, but don't take it outside just yet because there's a couple other things we have to spray paint, and I will point those out when we get there. So next is texture painting the top of the book. So I'm using a very light tan color and a black. These are just acrylic paints. You can get them for 50 cents or less at Walmart. I highly suggest going to Walmart for your acrylic paint and your chalk paint actually. But I'm using a dry brushing method. I have done this several times on my channel. If you've been with me for a while, you've probably seen me do this. But you dip the brush into the paint just a teeny tiny bit and then wipe off most of the excess onto a paper towel and just wipe it across the book. And now I'm going to be trying a different method that I actually haven't done on my channel with a Dollar Tree pack of makeup sponges. And I just kind of tore up the sponge to give it a more interesting texture, and I'm just going in and dabbing it. I did not like this for the light color, so you're going to see me go back in with the paintbrush and kind of fix what I did. But I did love this makeup sponge technique for the black, which I'm going to show you guys in a second. So I am just going in and smoothing out the little dots I made. I just wasn't in love with how obvious it was that it was dots of paint. So next is that black color, and like I said, I am using the makeup sponge. I dabbed it into the black. I wiped off most of the excess on a paper towel next to me, and now I'm just going in and burning the edges, which is what it's called when you darken the edges on something. And again, this makeup sponge was perfect for this. I think you probably could use a painting sponge brush, but I had these on hand and they were super cheap, so I didn't mind using them. And then I am also going in and just adding some kind of like little darker marks within the lighter ones that I created. The sponge brush was really good for blending. I will tell you though, these Dollar Tree sponge brushes absolutely fall apart if you rub them on anything. So I would never suggest these for makeup, I don't think, but they do work really well for this method of painting. I basically just continued this type of brush stroke, alternating between the light and the dark color, and covered the whole front and back of my book.
Did you guys know that Zoe Saldana voiced Kida? Did you guys also know that the plot of Atlantis was basically repeated in the movie Avatar? Not Avatar: The Last Airbender. We don't talk about that movie. In the Disney-owned Avatar, the plot is that the government of Earth has gone to this other world to steal their power source. Sound familiar? Because it is. And another fun fact about this same fact is that Zoe Saldana was the lead female character in Avatar. Disney. Come on to you.
Next, I took the framing piece for my book and I'm going in and painting all of the sides. I would honestly just suggest painting the sides and the bottom just so that you don't have to worry about any random pops of color coming through that gray paint. So if you couldn't get gray craft foam in the first place and you'd use green or something like that, I would just suggest painting all of the front, all the back, and all the sides. It just makes it to where you don't have to worry about little imperfections sticking out. And then once I allowed all the paint to dry, I'm going in with my hot glue gun and I'm just putting a thin line of glue down in one portion of the book, and I'm just going to tap down this framing onto that hot glue. I am working small sections at a time just to make sure that I can make any adjustments I need to, and I'm not having to try to glue this whole thing down all at the same moment. Now, when you get to the book's binding, you're actually not going to glue the framing down on the binding. It's actually going to be popped up a little bit. So I did the whole back cover and then I went to the front cover and I pushed it in toward the center. If you guys can see, I'm creating almost like a little bridge on the binding of the book with that framing. And that's to allow a space for that gold rod that we made earlier that's going to go on the spine of the book. Right here you can see it really well. I just kind of created this little mountain top with that frame. So now when I fold it, I have a gap in between to fit that little rod. Next, we're going to start making the intricate detailing on the front of the book and the back. So I'm going to tell you guys the back of my book is not 100% accurate just because I didn't want to have to repeat the steps on the front that I did for the back. So first thing I'm doing is taking that green craft foam that we painted gray on the front, and I made 1/2 inch marks on the back of the craft foam, and then I'm going to go in and cut it. So I'm just using a meter stick. I would highly suggest using a ruler of some kind just to make sure that your strips are all the same width or pretty close to it. And then I marked mine to about 1/2 inch and then went ahead and cut them out.
Also, I am dressed as this not just for this intro, but also because Jasem and I decided to collab on something for our social media. So be sure to be following me on Instagram as well as Jasem so that you don't miss on what we're up to.
We are to another section of this tutorial where I cut out a lot of all the things I tried, and I'm only going to show you guys what I finally went with just because this video would be 2 hours long if I included everything. So in order to make that diamond shape on the cover of the book, I am going to overlap multiple of these strips, and I'm going to do it in a pattern where it goes under, over, under, over. You guys are going to see what I mean when I glue it all together, but first thing I did was just lay down a strip. That middle strip is not attached. I just laid it down for point of reference in order to make my diamond symmetrical on all sides and make sure that I cut these strips to the proper sizing. Again, it's very important to use a reference photo when you're making things like this because you want to make sure that it looks how you want it to look, and I would never dare do something like this from memory because we don't trust her. So I'm just cutting these strips according to the scale between that middle strip and the book cover itself. Then I realized that I had this as a template. So because I cut out that little design, the empty space provided me a pretty perfect template to lay out the diamond and just make sure that it's the proper sizing while that little piece is outside drying from being spray painted gold. So once I had this laid down, I am just going to make sure that I like the scale and the sizing of each of the strips. One of them was too small, so I went ahead and cut a new one. And then I'm going to glue these all together doing that over-under method that I mentioned earlier. So the first one is going to get laid on top. And be careful not to use too much hot glue. If you do, you can always wipe it off, but I would suggest using the rubber finger covers that I didn't put on for some reason. And then you're gonna continue this pattern. So you guys are gonna see me kind of change this around, but also if you guys notice, you can see the green edge on the strips. You are gonna have to go in and like paint the sides of these. I went ahead and painted the sides and the back, again, just to cover everything so that you don't see green when you're looking at the gray. So that second strip I glued underneath, and then this one I am also gluing underneath because again it's going to go over, under, if you guys can see that pattern forming. And then I'm going to glue this one on top and then snip off that excess, and now we have our little diamond shape. So the next step is to create the cross pieces that connect it to the framing. So we've made the diamond, now we need to make the little cross braces to connect the diamond to the frame on the book. I'm trying to use the same words so that you guys know which piece I'm talking about, but I'm just taking some of the original strip that I cut in another attempt at doing something, and I'm going to be gluing these down to the diamond like so. And these are not attached to the book yet. I am again just getting spacing, and then I'll attach this all as one piece. So that bottom piece was a little bit too small, so I'm actually going to recut another piece. This is again why I painted such a large section of gray and cut so many strips, just so that I could work with this all at once and not have to worry about paint drying in between. So now I'm attaching the bottom. Next I'm going to do a teeny tiny piece going toward the opening of the book. And if you guys notice, I'm going to lay this down, and this piece is definitely too large. You can see it sticking off the edge there, which is totally okay. We're going to trim that up in just a second. The fourth piece of this cross is one that's going to be extra long. So I just cut that same size strip as the other ones, but I trimmed nothing off of it. So if you guys can see, it's the complete length of that craft foam. Next, I'm going in and painting all of my edges. And while I'm painting this, I'm going to explain. So that extra long piece, the reason we did that is because it's going to join onto the binding around this gold pole. So I'm adding in this gold rod here. I'm going to tell you guys in the video, I only hot glued the rod on, and I would highly suggest using E6000 or super glue along with hot glue, because this is a component of the book that I've noticed has started to loosen, which makes me really sad because I don't want it to break, obviously. But you're seeing here, I'm just applying some hot glue and attaching it. If I went back and did this again, I would definitely add a few drops of super glue or E6000. So I did cut the binding to have an easier time gluing this on, and I knew that I was going to have to trim it anyway, so I didn't mind just cutting it down the center. In a few steps from now, you guys are going to see how I glue this back down, but I'm actually going to skip ahead to another step because I did end up painting the inside of this because I could still see green, and that really bugs me. So I had to let the paint dry and then work on something else while that was drying. Going back to the diamond cross thing, I am just about to glue this on completely wrong, and then I realized it. But if you guys can see, that long strip is going to go all the way across the book. Now I'm going to warn you guys, it's actually a little bit too short, but I do kind of jimmy rig it to fix it because I just wanted to finish this book at this point. But I'm just sizing it out and making sure that I like how the top and the bottom fit first, and then I'm going to glue those on. And also, just so you guys know, this diamond actually floats a little bit above the book. So because it's on top of those cross braces, it doesn't actually touch the book, which I think gave it a really cool element of looking super 3D and giving it a lot of really cool texture. And then I'm going to glue down the side that's closest to the opening after trimming it. Next, I'm going to hot glue the symbol into the center. This one, I just went and grabbed from outside after spray painting. I let it dry for a couple hours and then I went and grabbed it. And by the way, hot glue works totally fine for all of the craft foam. You really don't need any super glue. The hot glue bonds it extremely well. And then I'm adding my little gold dot. Again, you could totally use puffy paint for that if you don't want to try to keep up with this little tiny piece of craft foam. And then next, we're going to be adding on these gold studs. Now, mine were not gold. They're actually these little smooth jewels that I have that are flat on the bottom. But the book has gold, almost like studs on it. So I spray painted them gold with the same spray paint that I used for the rod and for the symbol. And that is how I'm going to be creating studs on my book. Now, something you could do if you don't have something like this on hand is get gold thumbtacks that are just the rounded top. That would look really good. There's also upholstery tacks that have this exact same dome shape, and you can get them in gold really easily for really cheap. The thumbtacks I have seen at Dollar Tree if you guys are looking, or again, you could really get anything, even like googly eyes, something with that dome shape, and spray paint it gold, and boom, you've got your studs. I really liked these because they were larger, and I just thought it gave it a really good industrial look. But I am gluing them all around the diamond, and then I also glued them into the corners. A couple of these are not exact to the actual, shepherd's journal in the movie, so use your judgment, use your own creativity, and make it something that you love. Now, if you guys notice, the gray framing looks a lot different right now. It's because my camera cut out and I missed all of the distressing that I did to paint it. I am going to show you guys when I do the back, so just stay tuned. But right now, I'm going to attach my book hinge, which is just a 2-inch hinge from Walmart, and these come in a 2-pack, and you will have to get 3 of them, so you'll have to get 2 packs and you'll have an extra left over. Now, originally I only hot glued this down, but I did go back in and add E6000 underneath it and the craft foam just to give it a really good hold, because if you are going to be opening and closing the book, then you want to provide some extra reinforcement for your hinge. So again, I would E6000 and I would use hot glue as well. Now, something I want to point out about these hinges is they're super shiny silver. So what I did is I took a paintbrush and I dipped it into that elephant gray color that we used earlier, and I just patted it all over the hinge to give it more of a galvanized look. I'm so sorry I don't have like the footage to show you guys, but I do think that it's not a hard step. So the good news is at least it wasn't one of the complicated steps of this process. And then I am adding 2 more of those gold studs just by adding some hot glue. Next, we are going to be gluing 2 hinges together. So again, I have galvanized both of these just by dabbing on some of that gray elephant chalk paint, and I'm adding a little bit of hot glue to the already attached hinge, and then I'm just going to match up the second one. The hot glue held really well on this. I was honestly super impressed by how well it held, because I didn't know how it would work on metal, but it was great. Next, I'm going to be showing you guys how I textured all of that gray framing. So again, the back of my book is not going to be accurate. I'm totally okay with that. So I'm gluing down the strap that I created with the front of the book, and if you guys can see, there's a gap there. So I'm just going to cut a piece of craft foam, match them up, and call it a day. With these, I'm going to call them straps. With the straps that went around the gold bar, all I did was overlap them and glue them together. I am assuming I lost that footage as well because I've been editing for a while now and I cannot find it. But again, all you have to do is meet those two ends up and then glue them together. And then this one's easy because you just wrap it over the side of the book and glue it down. In order to try to cover up that seam a little bit, I did go in with some of the elephant gray chalk paint and just went over it all at once, hoping maybe it would fill in some of the crack between the two pieces of foam. And next I am going in with some gold acrylic paint. I did show this in the beginning of the video, but I told you guys I ended up going with spray paint. I am just adding little dry brush strokes using that gold acrylic paint. It gives it a really nice kind of weathered, almost like rusted look on what we're trying to make almost look like metal. So I'm doing this all across the framing. Anywhere where that gray frame has been placed, that's what I'm adding. I also went in with a light gray and I will be dry brushing across the framing with that as well. I did want to point out right here, you guys can see what I was talking about with just dabbing light gray paint onto the hinges, and it gives it a galvanized look. Next, I decided to distress the sides of the pages. So I put a little bit of water in a cup and added a light brown to it. This worked okay. I honestly think that using coffee or tea would be 1000% better. So if you can make a little cup of coffee or some tea and water it down a little bit and then use that to paint it, you'll get a much more beautiful coloring on the sides of the pages. But this is what I had on hand at the time, so that's what I went with. Okay guys, final step. The last one is adding the final hinge. I had to do this later because I only bought a 2-pack originally and then I realized I needed a third. So I am again going to go in with E6000 first, and I'm going to add this and hot glue in order to give it a really nice bond onto the book. Then I will go ahead and attach it to the back of the book. Just make sure that you have it lined up with the hinge on the front, because it would suck if you attached this and then realized that it's off center, because that hot glue is going to form a very good bond between the hinge and the book. So it's really going to be almost impossible to get it back off without ripping the craft foam. And lastly, I'm going to go in and add the final studs that I have just to the corners on top of the hinge, and really any place that you like them. Okay, last step is the magnets. Now you could just put the magnet in here and not attach it to anything, but it does slide around and it does like switch which hinge it's on and things like that. So I decided to do 2 magnets. The pack that I got off Amazon came with, I think, like 30 or something like that. I've used it for several projects. If you guys want to see other projects, I'll try to remember to put them in the box below. But I did glue these magnets down. Now I only glued them with hot glue, and of course they ended up coming off later on. So if you can use super glue and hot glue, that's usually the best if you're worried about something not lasting. But once that glue is all dry, that is the final step on this book, you guys. It is painted, it is textured, it is ready to go, and it even has a working hinge. And something I would really love to point out to you guys is the irony of the book title that I chose, which I didn't notice until I was editing, and that it's called Secret Sea, like the ocean, like where Atlantis ended up. Okay guys, we finally reached the end. I know this tutorial was a little bit on the long side. I'm so sorry, but I wanted to give you guys very intricate explanations just so that if you are making your own, you have as much help as I can give you. I also would highly suggest putting a clear coat over the jewels if that's how you paint them, because some of the gold paint does come off a little bit if you're handling the book a lot, but just adding a little bit of Mod Podge or clear coat spray will fix that right up. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Please go check out all of the other channels that created some really cool Atlantis content for you guys, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!